Conversations with leading experts in enterprise resource planning. Evolving ERP. Powered by Insight Jam.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Evolving ERP. As always, I'm your host and producer Ryan Daly, and with me today is Dan Aldridge. Dan, welcome back to the show. And you brought a friend for us to talk to who I think is going to be very, very interesting. Welcome to the show for the first time, John Shorter.
Thank you.
Lovely to have you.
Thank you.
Very interested to see where this conversation's going to go. Of course, before we get to that, as your host, I am obliged to encourage you. I'll stop short of demanding, but please go just down below, click that bell, click that thumbs up, like and subscribe. This is YouTube after all. If you do that, you'll know when the next show's coming out. It'll be right up there in your menu. What a treat. Please go ahead and do that. And now that you've done that, Dan, like I said, you brought a friend, John Shorter. We're talking, well, we'll be talking a lot of things. I'm sure you guys you'll get into it. Talking about how to talk and how to understand the C-suite when it comes to ERP. This is something that even if you're an expert in whatever trade, whatever field you're in, something I've experienced personally, it's not always the easiest to understand, to relay your message up, or, hey, if you've made it to that point, to speak to your employees, to your workforce. So I'm very interested. I'm going to be paying very close attention on any advice that you might have about this, because I think it may come up in my, or hey, if you're out there, your future. But John, before we get started, I'd like to know a little bit. I always ask the guests, and you're no exception.
Yeah.
How you got into ERP? The stories are always, well, they're always never the same.
Right.
So, like I always say, no one went to ERP university and got a degree in ERP. It's always coming from a different angle. So I'm curious about how you got started in this field.
Got it. So it's actually an odd story, to be honest. I'm a retired Navy submarine commander. I drove subs for a while, and then I was in an accident and had to retire from the Navy. And so I ended up at General Electric as a junior military officer. It wasn't junior at the time, but they put me in that program in the shop floor in Greenville, South Carolina, and making gas turbines. And I was doing financial analysis, all sorts of stuff, learning all sorts of things. And then Jack Welch in 2001 decided we need to digitize GE. So they wanted to digitize GE. So every division had to find someone to run digitization. And Bob Nardelli, who was our CEO at the time, you probably know him from Chrysler and Home Depot. He was the CEO of our division at the time, GE Power. And he said, I need someone who knows how to get stuff done. So I want a manufacturing person. I need someone who understands IT. Electrical engineers understand IT. So my undergrad and graduate degrees are in electrical engineering. So it just happened. They went down the list and they found an electrical engineer in manufacturing, and it was me. So they called me up and said, hey, you're an electrical engineer, right? I said, yes, I am. He goes, so you know IT, right? I said, I do now, Bob. And so I became the digitization guy. So for the 2 years, really, I spent my time working in the shop floor, delivering, manufacturing machine tool automation, MES systems, quality systems, stuff like that for fulfillment. Then I got a phone call again from a guy named Steve Bransfield, who was the vice president of supply chain for GE Power. He goes, John. I said, yeah, Steve. He goes, I need you in Florence. And I go, you need me in Florence? Okay. Next week? Or he goes, no. I need you in Florence. This is the oil and gas division of GE, which was leading a massive transformation, which included ERP. And he said, I need you to come run this. And I went, okay. Well, my wife is 9 months pregnant at the time. Let's be clear, right? So I call her up. I said, hey, you always want to go back to Florence. She went to school there as an undergrad. And I said, you always want to go back to Florence. Now's the chance. So sure enough, we hopped over to Florence, Italy, and spent 3.5 years in Florence, Italy, where I led probably the largest transformation in GE's history. It was an $8 billion division that became a $20 billion division. ERP, PLM, CRM, commercial, you name it. We replaced every system in that business. And I showed up, and it was me and 400 Italians. And that was the team. So I learned Italian pretty quickly, as you can imagine. And that sort of introduced me to ERP. And that went really well. And at GE, no good deed goes unpunished. So I came back and they put me in charge of engineering systems and then added supply chain systems. And so for the next 11 years, basically, I spent all my time leading ERP, PLM, all those different platforms and systems. had a lot of success. I was very fortunate to have wonderful people, wonderful teams that I worked with, very, very sharp, very bright people who worked really, really hard. And anybody who says the ERP is easy is wrong. It's a lot of work. Let's be real clear, right? So 80-hour week is a good week in the ERP world. And probably led, I don't know, over 100 implementations responsible for and led across my experience across the GE divisions, the large industrial divisions, and a lot of PLMs as well, because GE was a very engineering-centric company, as you know. And from that, basically, long story short, I was won one of the Gartner Awards in 2015, and a guy named Rod Johnson met me, and he goes, "Hey, you ever thought about doing it from the other side?" And so I was off to Oracle, and I became the supply chain transformation guy for Oracle, led a lot of supply chain transformations at Oracle for 5 years, and gosh, over 200, and with a lot of very large companies, pharma to med device, to aerospace and defense, to you name it, right? It was all over the place. And then the same guy, Rod Johnson, was the president of Infor after that. And he called me up and said, "Hey, you want to do it again?" I said, "Sure." So I ended up at Infor for 5 years. A little different role. I was basically spending a lot of my time there sort of creating a software company, right? I mean, it was really a little more fundamental there. They were a great software company, but they were a holding company, right? They really weren't doing enterprise ERP in the cloud. And so we built out, change management, data management, real customer support services, right? The things you have to have, right? Managed services, things like that. Built out those programs and then started building out the partner network. And that's how I met PCG. So they were the only viable partner Infor had. I'll be honest with you, in discrete manufacturing. And sadly today, they're still the only viable partner that Infor has. And they're very, very good. But did a lot of work with them, and then I ended up retiring from Infor and started doing some independent consulting here with PCG. I have, in my career, probably done over at least 500, probably closer to 1,000 ERP transformations and engineering transformations with PLM. And I would tell you, it's been a blast. It really has been. But anybody that says it's easy has never done it. That's the only answer I'd give you. It's a lot of work. I had an expression from an old boss who said, the only problem with people leadership is people. And the only problem with ERP is people, because you have to get people to give up what they know, right? You have to get people to abandon a process that they were raised under, right? 90% of everything a person learns at a company comes from the person sitting at the desk next to them, right? Most people don't realize that, right? But it's true. And so they've learned a way to do things that were basically word of mouth, right? And this is how we've always done it. We've always done it this way. This is how we're going to do it. And so taking that and breaking that history is very difficult. We call it change management, organizational change management, but the reality is that's the hard part of an ERP, right? The technology's there. The data you'll get, right? Yep. On the data, but it's not that hard now with the technology. The people's the hard part. And great people, I love working with them. But if you see me at a customer, I will always go straight to the shop floor. That's where you learn. The place you're going to learn. You're not going to learn sitting in an office talking to finance. Nothing wrong with finance. I've worked for CFOs, but the place you're going to learn is in the shop, right? That's where you're going to see what's actually happening. And you want to know who's in charge? Ask a hard question to a group of people and see who everybody looks to. That's who's in charge, right? Regardless of status or rank or whatever, there's always an influencer in a room, and you have to figure out who that person is. That's who you zero in on, because you get the influencer, you get the team. That's how it works. So a lot of long answer to how I got into ERP, but I tend to do that. I apologize for that. I tend to be a bit verbose. So, but I think hopefully it gives you some insight into the background.
Absolutely, and it suits the medium, right? Hey, we're here to talk. But what a sage piece of advice there at the end. I love that, because I have experienced that, as I'm sure we all have, and I think until you just said it, didn't really notice it, didn't really put it together. But yeah, that you'll look to the person who you look to, and there's if you follow that, you'll get your answer. We've talked a lot about digital transformation on this show, but it's like, and when it first came up, me not knowing a whole lot about ERP coming into this, I was like, well, why haven't obviously businesses are digital? How has this not happened yet for so many businesses? And learning more and more and hearing, okay, 20, 25 years ago, you starting it with a company as large as GE. Oh, it's so complex, and like you said, all of these processes that need to change, that are so codified by potentially generations of human word of mouth, hand to hand knowledge. It is so hard to transform. It's starting to make sense to me why there are still businesses that haven't changed and why they need to in the future. But I'm excited to learn more, so I'm going to step away and I'll listen to the two of you. So Dan and John, really looking forward to it.
I was going to say to Ryan, see why I brought him on as my friend?
Yeah, I get it now.
Yeah, I mean, John, amazing experience, obviously. And I wanted to, Ryan didn't talk about it, but we had an aerospace and defense webinar yesterday, which was a solutions review production also called the Spotlight. And you play a big role in that and had a lot of good information to impart. But I wanted to kind of pull on a couple threads here. I think that the executives that you're speaking to, the CIOs mainly, C-levels in general, I guess. What are you seeing that they're worried about right now, and how do you see this kind of all this attention to AI playing into that?
Right. So there's a couple elements to it, right? FOMO is clearly one of the big issues, right? Fear of missing out, right? Is there something out there that I'm missing that I didn't take advantage of? AI has been around for a long time. A lot of people probably don't realize that, right? They think of AI as a new thing. What they're thinking of is generative AI, right? So Siri, the Amazon Alexa, things like that, right? That's the initial generative AI that you really saw. And now we're seeing it in text and scripts and being able to write papers and things like that. The reality is AI has been around for, I did my dissertation in neural networks in 1994, just to give you an idea, right?
Yeah,
that was AI.
Electrical engineering. Yeah. Yep.
So we were doing learning systems in 1994, right? So it's not a new concept. The widespread use of it is new, right? What's new is the awareness of it. And AI, the trick with AI, I'll start with AI. The trick with AI is that it's not knowing how to do the partial differential equations to solve the problem, right? That's done, right? That stuff is long done. Encode, decode, all the methodologies behind generative AI, that's all done, right? What is important is figuring out how to use it. And that is probably one of the big, to be honest with you, we don't talk about AI that much. You go to a meeting with Microsoft, they'll talk about it every 30 seconds, right? It's just AI, like it used to be cloud, right? The reality is AI is a tool, right? Like any tool in the toolbox that you can use to eliminate steps and processes, right? That's the big advantage AI brings to the table. You're actually eliminating process steps. And that's huge, right? Because that's massive productivity when you eliminate steps. What we find is that when I talk to the C-level, it's interesting because I talk to a lot of C-level executives, CEO, COO, CFO. I spend a lot of time with COOs based on my background, to be honest with you. I probably spend the most time with them and CIOs, of course. And what I find is that the biggest thing right now is, besides the FOMO, obviously, that everybody worries about, is the churn, right? There's just massive churn, massive uncertainty. And the uncertainty is coming from a lot of things, right? One is it is perceived that things are occurring right now, right? It's not things that actually happened. It's the perception of things that have happened. Two, at the webinar, it's a lot about supply disruption, right? There's a lot of that going on right now for a lot of reasons, right? So tariffs, embargoes, a lot of different policy decisions being made. They're causing a lot of churn. In the aerospace and defense industry, we see massive increases in investment, right? And we see massive changes to the global footprint of how people are able to use things, which is creating massive changes to supply chains. And so that's a lot of churn, right? It's a lot of churn that's going on. And the companies that are staying out in front of that are basically battening down the hatches. That's a Navy term, right? So when bad weather, right, you're battening down the hatches. And they're basically battening down the hatches and very reluctant to do much of anything right now. I'm seeing a lot of delay on various programs and initiatives that they're trying to do. There are some forcing functions that I'm seeing C-level executives see. One is being the compliance requirements in aerospace and defense and in med device. So we're seeing that both in healthcare and in aerospace and defense, where they're being forced to do things, right? So the new FDA, the new approach is much more rigorous, much more informed. I'll say it that way. And so as a result, you're having a lot more compliance requirements being put on companies, even though they're not adding compliance steps, right? So let's be clear, they're not adding regulations. What they're doing is they're requiring people to follow the regulations that they've always been there, right?
Oh yeah, finally, right?
Yeah. And so that's creating the forcing function for companies to have to transform. And so I hear that a lot from companies. I also hear a lot of, cash is not rampant right now. So cash flow is not tremendous with every company. 5 years ago, I'd have told you everybody had cash, right? So they were trying to make the best use of their cash that they had, and taking these large initiatives. Now you're not seeing the quite the amount of cash because of inflation, right? It's been so rampant for the last 4 or 5 years. So you're seeing a definite little bit of belt tightening going on in the industry, and the C-level execs worry a lot about that. CFOs, of course, but then all the C-level execs worry about that because if you don't have a lot of free cash, you don't have a lot of flexibility, right? And that was the beauty of GE, right? We had a credit card company that printed cash, basically, and so we had lots of cash all the time.
Yeah.
That just doesn't exist in today's marketplace. So what we're seeing is that companies are having to be much more judicial in their approach, and so a lot more risk averse than even historically they had been. So we're finding that a lot of companies are really struggling to take up these large initiatives. They know they have to do it. They understand that it's required, but there has to be some external forcing function to require it. It's just too much risk for them to take it on. So you'll see a lot of companies that are deferring these decisions out a year or 2 years. That's very common in today's world. But C-level execs, you talk to them, it's just get to know them. They're people, right? They're just people. I was a C-level executive for many years. They're just people. They just want to talk to you, and they want to get to know you. They want to know, what your experience is, and also, what's in it for me, right? That's the most important phrase to always remember anytime you're in a conversation with anybody of any level of influence is what's in it for them, right? The WIFM is so critical because if there's not a reason to be talking to you, why are they talking to you, right? And so you have to, within the first minute or two, get into why it matters and what's relevant. And so I find that that's extremely important when you're talking with these executives. I have a lot of friends who are executives, right, from the days, all the GE mafia, right? We're all everywhere now, and it's interesting that they're dealing with their own issues over and over again, right? And they need to know what's going to help them in their world, and so that's to me the most important thing is to be relevant, right? Be relevant and have insights that are useful to the person you're talking to. Seems basic, seems simple, but so many people don't do it. You'd be shocked,
Right.
They get in to tell their story instead of telling the story the person needs to hear. So it's very interesting. Yeah.
Want more Insight Jam? Subscribe to our YouTube channel for shorts, panels, podcasts, and more. In your shorts feed, enjoy a daily dose of best practices from tech experts and leading solution providers, while long-form panel discussions and keynotes, recorded live every quarter, go deep on important industry topics. And don't miss our collection of regular podcasts, keeping you informed on the latest trends. We're hard at work collecting the best enterprise technology information from around the globe, so subscribe to be notified of our next upload. Now, let's get back to the show.
When you're doing that, when you're laying out a course of action for a C-level and understanding them as humans and in this AI world, would you say that you would come with sort of a graduated or a phased approach to what they need to do because they don't have the funds in the short term? That may change as the supply chain uncertainty kind of works its way out and the tariffs and all of that stuff work its way out, that they would have maybe some more budget, but to prioritize then, to say, okay, you don't need a standalone AI project at this moment, right? You might need a kind of a graduated approach to going to the cloud with your applications, for example, for application modernization that might include things like microservices and things that we see emerging, right? Would you say that would be a good approach? Because you don't want to I mean, you want to review always the business processes up front. You want to put a change management approach in place, and so that you don't start automating and applying AI to bad data or bad processes, right? You don't want to you don't want to that's a disaster if you do that, right? And it's counterproductive, right? It's not moving them to where they need to be. So would you say something like that would be a good way to do it?
Definitely, that's always the approach, right? You always want to come at it with small bites at the apple, right? You start with small bites and then you go take bigger bites, unless there is a special cause issue, right? So this is a black belt term, special cause variation. And what that means is that, CMMC level 2, right? In A&D, you got to do it. It's not optional anymore, right? They're getting audited now, right? So it's happening. So you have to do it. You don't have a choice. We had a couple customers who just had to do it. It wasn't optional, right? We had to go all in and go. Very rare though. Typically what you see is, what is your burning issue? What's the problem you're having, right?
Yep.
And then let's go fix the problem, right? Let's go solve the business problem. Is it distribution? Okay, let's go put a warehouse management system. Is it financial forecasting? Okay, let's put in a financial forecasting tool, right? Those kinds of things. And then typically you solve the problems out of the gate. It builds confidence and it builds a team with a mission, right? And the most important thing about any major ERP initiative, there's the top 10 things you have to make an ERP work. The most important thing is a reason to do it, right? And so many people don't understand that. Am I doing this to keep up with the Joneses? Then it's not a good reason, right? So I need to actually have a reason to do this. That's right.
Yeah.
And so it typically what you see is that companies have, look, General Electric to this day ships every aircraft engine on a mainframe. To this day.
Do they really?
Modern companies in the world, right? When it comes to IT modernization, they use a CAS mainframe to ship every jet engine, right? Now, they have Oracle all around it, right? But the reality is the core engine that is doing the planning and shipping is a mainframe, right? And it works fine, right? So you'll find that companies will do the right thing, right? They fundamentally will, but they have to see a reason to do it, right? And there has to be value to it, right? We talk about value stories and things like that. It has to be a forcing function. And so the most important thing is to zero in on what the pain points are. You can't walk in and go, oh, well, I see your problem, we'll solve that. That's often happens. You'd be surprised how often companies will do that. Oh, I know the problem, I'll go fix it. That's not how you do it, right? You spend some time, you get to know people, you hang out in the lunchroom, right? You chat with folks, and you over time, a day or so, you sort of get a feel for where they're really struggling, right? Where the real issues are. And CEOs will tell you, let's be clear, but they don't always know. And nothing against CEOs. I have a lot of good friends who are CEOs, but they don't always know what the real problems are. And so you got to sort of spend a little time, get to know folks, and get a feel for where they are. And then you find that problem, you solve that problem, right? Solve the big problem, right? We had a logistics problem at GE. A wind turbine, okay? 22% of the cost of wind turbine is logistics. You know why? Because the blades are 250 feet long. That's expensive. So we had to solve a logistics problem. So I put in a logistics system, right? Go figure. It makes sense. Things like that, right? So go solve problems. And then once you solve the problem, the company becomes open to, oh, that really helped me. I can go make it happen. And then when you think about AI needs one thing to function. It's very simple. Data. It has to have clean, repeatable data.
Yep.
Otherwise, it doesn't work. They call it automating a bad process, right? It's sure a sign of death, right? Because you now have hidden the problem, you can't see it. So in order to do AI, you can't just, I'm going to do an AI initiative, and I'm going to pop AI in here. It doesn't work that way, right? What you have to do is you have to have repeatable business processes that are generating consistent data. Then you can apply AI, and it works great, right? It works very well. It's just math. Right? A lot of people think AI is this big thing. It's just a bunch of partial differential equations that you're solving. Is all it is. It's not that fancy, right?
Yeah.
But if you get the data clean and you get the data right, and you can use AI to clean some of the data, let's be clear, that I have done that, and that does work. But what you'll find is if you get clean, repeatable data, then you can really put gasoline on your fire, right? It will explode, and you can really automate a lot of processes and simplify a lot of things. We have I know of factories, I'll keep it generic, that we literally have gone to, I think there's a new shop floor they have in a company where they have 10 workers in the shop, right? It's completely automated, right? The entire shop. And they're shipping $250 million of product a year out of that factory, right? And they have 10 people on the shift, right? That's just amazing, right? It's robotics. Yes, there's robotics. There's things like that. But AI is basically being used to learn. Machine learning is being used to learn, right? And then the AI algorithms are being used to make decisions, to automate, simplify processes, and correct errors. And it's pretty amazing. So you can do amazing things with AI, but without a repeatable process with this generating consistent data, it doesn't work at all. So that's very important for people to understand that, right? So that's why ERP is so important, because what ERP fundamentally does is it generates repeatable processes with consistent data. That's really what it's going to do. And yeah, it does other things. I get it. There's a lot of other elements of ERP, but fundamentally what ERP is going to do is going to give you
that's the cool,
right?
That's
then
the core,
you can start
right?
using your tools. That's it.
Yeah.
That's all it is. And a lot of people, they try to make it more than it is, right? It's really not that fancy. It's hard. Yes, I get it. It's hard, but it's not that fancy.
It's a back office system when you get right down to it, right? But when you were talking, I thought about our webinar just yesterday, and the VP of Business Systems there at Avex Aerospace. That's about a $750 million company, so that's a big company, and they put in their system in 6 months. And they included PLM, which I was saying the same thing. I said, God bless you, Andrew, for doing what you did. And there were several funny things about that. One is he had that slide landing a 747 on a canoe. I was like, that is just fantastic analogy about, how it is to upgrade to a cloud ERP from an on-premise system. So 6 months is amazing just with that. And then the embedded PLM is also amazing. And the fact that it's vertical, that says, we have the CMMC2 and we have all of these DFARs and DPAS, and I don't even know all the acronyms covered in this. FedRAMP, yeah, right. It's all certified and it's in the AWS GovCloud, right? So he had all of those things at his disposal, but still 6 months is unbelievable. And the thing he said is exactly what you just said, John. Working on data. So he got out ahead of data and started cleaning master data, business partners, items, bombs, all of that stuff. Well out ahead of even the engage phase of the project, right? So as he headed into, you call it phase 0, you can call it engage, whatever you want to call it. Out in front of that, he was doing his data work. And he wasn't just doing it for the ERP. He was doing it for PLM, so drawings, things like that. He had SolidWorks in the mix. He had an HRMIS system or whatever, HRIM system in UKG. He had Concur, which is SAP. I mean, he had all these things going, all these moving parts, but his focus was data and processes. That's exactly the right process or the right focus that you want to have heading into these projects. Not AI, because you'll get to AI, you'll get to RPA, you'll get to all these things, but do a good job, come up live and do it in a phased way. So he's bringing up the other plants on that combination of 3 or 4 systems, right? He has to do it concurrently, right? And so he's not, I would say a full-scale standalone AI project would just be a distraction.
100%. Yep. And frankly, a waste of time. It really would
Waste
be.
of time. Yeah.
You have to solve the problem, right? The problem is underneath, right? And then once you solve it underneath, then the AI just occurs. It's not fancy, right? It's simple. It's math. It's just math. That's all you're doing, right? But if you don't feed the beast with the right data, it's not going to do what it needs to do. It's very simple. I would say, to get a 6-month deployment, have I done that? Yes. I've done 2-week deployments, right? For a ransomware attack, right? We've done that. But the only way you do that, with the scale they did it, is leadership. You have to have strong leadership that's bought in so that everyone else gets in line, right? And the only way, I remember the largest PLM I ever did was actually the largest implementation I ever did for a $20 billion division of GE. And we had an engineering leader who was my boss, who was phenomenal. He was phenomenal. He was out in front. He led. At one point he said, "I will fire you if you don't use this system." And he was pretty intense, but it was leadership, right? That's what it comes down to. And for an understated guy, right? He was a very relaxed, understated guy at Avex, but he obviously had very strong leadership and led very strongly himself. That's the only way these happen that quickly, right? I mean, you could talk about a lot of things. I mean, ransomware is a one-off, right? That happens. But if you're just trying to do it of your own volition, it really comes down to the people that are leading. That's really what it comes down to. And, with that comes the communication, with that comes the empathy, with the, all the elements of change management that you have to have. But the only thing that holds ERP implementations up is people, right? It's, I say that over and over again, love people, a lot of good friends, right? But the reality is people changing is what holds every ERP implementation up. And we did an analysis. We were spending several $100 million a year. I'll just leave it at that on ERP deployments. And we did an analysis at GE on what our cost was. And McKinsey did it for us. And because, you had to give McKinsey money. That's what every company does. And we found that 60% of all of our costs on ERP implementations, median, obviously, not a mean, but the median was about 60% of all the cost was change management. Due to delays and things, it was all change management, right? It wasn't data, it wasn't integrations, it wasn't the things we think are technically difficult, because you have technical people who can figure that stuff out, right? That's what they do.
It's the people aspects. Yeah.
Yeah. We had a site in China that was delivering $1 billion of product a year. Okay. Massive site. And they never once logged into the ERP system. They loaded spreadsheets up to the ERP system, right? Now, this wasn't a GE company. This is another company, but they actually never opened the ERP system once. And so the way we found out was I went to the access logs and I said, all right, so who's logged in? I do that technical background, right? So I could do that stuff. And it was shocking. No one had ever logged into the system. They were uploading spreadsheets in the background.
Oh, yeah.
The company itself, and shipping $1 billion of product a year. It was amazing.
Well, so I've heard before that the biggest ERP system on the planet is QuickBooks spreadsheets.
100%, number one faithful tool in the world. Excel, baby. You're spot on. And to be honest with you, that's how Microsoft sells their product, right? Microsoft is really good about showing things in Excel, right? Because people know Excel. It's easy to use. They know how to manipulate it. They can do union queries. They can do all the things they know how to do, right? And by basically accelerating that capability and feeding it into an ERP system. That's why if you look at every ERP system on the planet now, it has interoperability with Excel. Every single one of them.
Yeah.
Right. For that piece,
absolutely.
Right. Because that's what people use. I mean, that's what I'm comfortable in, right? When I'm doing a budget, right? That's what I do. So, that's what people do. So.
Unlock better leads through Solutions Review events.
Welcome to Data Demo Day. Expert Roundtable, Solution Spotlight featuring Monte Carlo, Cohesity, Denodo, Cloudflare, High Gear, Broadcom, Next Thing.
Boost your brand with a webinar that shares comprehensive use cases, real-time product demos, and an interactive Q&A. All broadcast live to LinkedIn, YouTube, and Zoom from our Boston studio, or even on location. Fill your sales funnel with high-quality targeted leads. And contact us today by visiting solutionsreview.com/virtual events.
So I want to tell you a quick story, and then I want to get a story from you.
Okay.
My story is about Bluebird, the school bus company.
Yeah, I know them well.
So,
yep.
Yes. So I was their finance consultant when they initially implemented the system. And I was like you, though. I got there, and there's the sort of the ivory tower or whatever. The finance group is in its own spot there. And I said, take me down to the floor. I want to see the floor. I want to see how this thing is built. So I went down on the floor, and I noticed something really interesting in how they build. So they have the cab and the chassis moving along separate lines. And then at some point, the chassis gets flipped upside down. Mm-hmm. And they do work on the engine or whatever. It was almost like Jiffy Lube, they had this space underneath. And I said, what is that? And they said, well, we had a guy who was just a shop floor guy, right? Just a shop floor worker. And he said, way we're doing this is really inefficient, where it goes along right side up. and adding all these parts and everything. Why don't we flip it over? And this came from a shop floor guy that completely changed their process and made them much more efficient, much better. That struck me. And the other thing that struck me was that these people were there was such a good culture there of the people. And it was like you say, you go into a room and you find that person that's kind of the leader, regardless of what their position was. And I noticed that during the implementation, they would always go to those leaders and, for advice and everything. So there was a really nice people aspect to it. And the final thing was their configurations of their buses. You would think you think about a bus and you're like, they're all the same, right? They're completely different. Every bus that goes out is basically completely different. They have state regulations. They have all this stuff. And they have a mainframe. I don't know if they still do, but even after they put in the ERP, they still had a mainframe doing the configurations. Why? Because the CPQ at the time wasn't good enough to take in all these constraints and everything like that. And I learned, hey, they're sticking with this mainframe until somebody comes up with a way that they can do those very complicated configurations. So that's my story.
So I'm going to add to your Bluebird story. So Bluebird is going through a cloud transformation today. They're actually going through that. I was with them for 2 years ago, I think. And their CIO is probably the most knowledgeable CIO I've ever met. And that's saying something because I've been around.
Scott Cheever.
He's amazing. 38 years at the company, knows everything. I mean, literally the man knows everything. He was absolutely incredible and still is. It hasn't stopped being incredible. But very understated guy, very quiet, But I went in and I looked at their PLM environment, right? Because I know PLM pretty well, right? And so I said, hey, let me help y'all. I can help you with they have a Dassault installation, so if you think about it, PLM world, there's the big three, right? PTC, Team Center, and Windchill, Team Center, and Dassault, Innovia 3DX, they call it now. And they had a massive install. And I went, why on earth did you do that? You're just making school buses, guys. And they let me go in. I know Dassault pretty well. So I went to the product with them. You're absolutely spot on.
It's unbelievable. You would
unbelievable complexity.
Oh my God.
I was like, we didn't make nuclear power plants this complex. It was unbelievable. And, it was amazing how they had leveraged the technology so incredibly well, right? And I was so impressed with what they'd done. And they had this very old mainframe ERP, right, that they were still running on, and I'm sure you helped with, right, back in the day. It wasn't mainframe, I guess, on-prem, but it was older.
On-prem, yes.
Functioning, right? But they were missing a lot of opportunities. And so went ahead and did a full cloud transformation onto LN, Cloud Suite.
It's awesome.
I was really impressed with those people because they were Macon, Georgia, salt of the earth, good people. And I was just blown away by that CIO. He just knew so much. I was just so impressed. Incredibly
they're wonderful people.
Been there forever, right? And that helped, I guess. But it was neat. Yeah. So story, I have to go back to Italy. So the largest, most successful transformation ever did in my life was in GE Oil and Gas in Florence, Italy. It was the first big one I did, to be honest. And it was also the most successful. Go figure. And it was funny because we were, I was airdropped in, right? The old GE style was you airdrop American executives in and they go solve the problems, right? Well, I wasn't quite an executive yet, but I was getting there. So that was sort of what made my chops for GE, right? So I was very successful in that. And so it went very well. I wasn't successful. The team was successful, a huge team, right? Very good people, friends for life, just wonderful people. We all sat in one room, all of us in one big room at the Learning Center in Florence, Italy.
Wow.
And it was 399 Italians talking Italian, very emotionally. They're very emotional, right? And it was
hands going, everything.
Hands everywhere. You want to make an Italian person mute, tie his hands together. But
I've heard that joke. That's a good joke.
So I learned so much there, right? So some of the big lessons learned I had from Italy were one, incredibly hardworking people. There's this impression that somehow Italians are, oh my gosh, they work so hard, but they don't start early, right? They come to work at 6 a.m., right? They come to work at the appropriate time that they need to be there. And then they'll work late if they have to, right? They're incredibly hardworking people. Second thing I learned about them is family is what matters. The biggest lesson learned I had from Italy was work-life balance, right? Sunday in Italy, the entire family gets together every week. The entire family. I mean, it's Thanksgiving for them on Sunday, every Sunday. So one of the things you learn as you move into a culture, you start to learn the culture, is what are the hot buttons, right, for them. Making somebody work on a Sunday in Italy is absolutely verboten. You cannot do that.
Yeah.
It's not an option. You don't consider it, right? I remember my boss at the time, he was the head of supply chain. He said, well, we got to work Sunday. I said, nope, we're not working Sunday. I said, we'll work Saturday till midnight, but we're not working Sunday. He goes, but we have to. I said, no, we're not working Sunday. that's just not something you do in Italy, right? And It was fascinating. Those are the kinds of lessons that I learned, though, as you get into a culture, how different the cultures are, right? You know, in India, I had a lot of nods that really were never nods, right? They were just, had thousands of employees in India, love them, lifelong friends, right? Wonderful people, work very, very hard, lived very difficult lives, right? They commuted 2 hours to work on a bus, right? Things like that. It was insane. And I instituted work from home in 2011 in Bangalore, India, at the Jack Welch Center. I let people work from home, and we helped them wire their houses. And I was able to add 500 people in 1 year. And you know what it was? It was women who had children, because the Indian culture, women have to stay with children. That's just the culture. That's how the culture is, which is fine. It's just part of their culture. So by enabling them to work from home, I got some of the best employees in the world, right? Hema, Getha, I just think there's a bunch of them I could think of off the top of my head who are amazing employees, did incredible things for our company, but they had to do it from home because they had to be with the kids. And it was fascinating. Those are the kinds of things you learn over years of doing this. Is the local culture is absolutely critical. And if you don't understand the local culture, bring in people who do, right? So that's why when people ask me, do you have a global, PCG, do you have a global footprint? I said, yeah, they do, but you don't want that, right? You want locals, right? So you don't want them to airdrop people in. And Adam's done a really good job. Adam, the CEO, has done a really good job of creating partnerships globally. And that's real critical, because if you don't understand the local culture, you will not succeed. It's very simple. So it goes back to change, getting people to change, right? You're not going to get people to change if they don't, know who they are or how they function, right? So I think that's probably the most poignant lesson learned I had. It's not much of a story, but it really is the biggest lesson learned I had was know the people, empathize with the people, know who they are, know where they're coming from, and you'll succeed, right? The minute you do that, you really do succeed. But don't assume anything, right? Because we know the expression, right? If you assume, you make an ass of you and me, right? And it's so true, because people don't understand the motivations for folks, right? They don't understand that, money's not a motivator in a lot of cultures, right? They could care less. They're doing it because they have to, right? They're doing it because they have to survive, but that's it, right? It's not a motivator. Give them more money, it's not going to motivate. It's other things, right? And time off is huge. It just depends on the culture and where they are, right? So, and the other thing to remember that I learned very, very painfully, honesty is not required in many cultures. A lot of people don't realize that. They think that, if you're telling me something, it must be true, right? And they don't realize that saving face is much more important than being honest. And so that's another element that you have to learn over years. It takes time to get, you get burned a few times and you figure it out. But trust but verify becomes a very real term. And you have to really think through that, because, it's not that they're bad people. It's just that's the culture, right? It's of course, lying's not good. I don't agree with it, of course, but it's the culture. And so you have to understand how to work around those kinds of cultural issues. So that to me was the most important lesson I learned. The global cultural aspects are so critical, and so few people really understand that. And if you don't pick that up and you don't follow that, you will not succeed. It's pretty simple. So,
well, thank you so much, John.
Story, but
no, that's perfect. That's exactly where I wanted you to go. But it looks like we're wrapping up. We could spend a lot more time, obviously, but
I agree.
I
mean, we could keep going. I could listen to you talk all day, John. I mean, there's just the piece of advice that you have in there.
Yep.
Whether you're working on ERP or I feel like a lot of it just expands to whatever industry that you're in, whatever line of work, whether you're working with one other person or a team of, hundreds. In some of those stories, but I've dealt with something similar. It's like, oh yeah, I probably should have done that. Probably should. The understanding and getting to understand the culture is something I feel like a lot of companies just take for granted. It's like, oh well, get your people, their people, just work with them, figure it out. And there's not a lot of preparation that goes into that or training. Although I know some companies do, definitely. I know people who have had to take Japanese business courses because the way of doing business there is so completely different. And like you say, yeah, the saving face is very important. There's a much more rigid structure to it.
You bring up some good points. Yeah, I remember I've seen failures when it comes to this, right? So I've seen companies that failed. I'll just leave it anonymous. Company bought a hydro division of a company, and they obviously people know the background, but they basically forced the people to change how they operated, and didn't ask, and just said, come in and said, this is how you're going to do it. This was 25 years ago. 420 of the 430 employees quit the next day, right? And
Next
this is
day.
in Norway,
Wow.
right? In Norway, they're so wealthy, right, that they had jobs the next day. They didn't care, and so they lost the entire operation in one day by just not paying attention, listening to the culture. And
I
that's
imagine
where
that set things back a little bit.
Absolutely. It's a great lesson learned for people, right? But it was really good in that people developed an appreciation. And if you don't understand that, you are destined to fail. I just hate to say it that way, but it's very true. So interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, like Dan mentioned, I did forget to mention up top, but do go check out the webinar that you guys took part in just this past week as of recording here. We'll have a banner up here. You can go right down below and click that link to get more into some actual use cases of everything John and Dan were talking about here. So please go do check that out if you want to learn more. And if you want to learn more about John, where should people look for you?
The quickest, easiest way is always LinkedIn. That's always the fastest by far. And look me up. And there's not a lot of John Shorters in the world. There's actually on LinkedIn, so it's very easy to find. Look me up on LinkedIn, and I'll connect you with cell phones and all those kinds of things. But that LinkedIn is definitely my Facebook. That's what I use instead of Facebook. So I live on LinkedIn.
Right on. And Dan, I assume you'll say the same, unless you got anything new.
Yeah, LinkedIn is good. Also, John is helping us out at PCG. So it's pcgservices.com. And we have a smart factory website called A Smart Factory, all one word, .com.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, John. And I was mixing your names there. Dan, thank you as always for coming on. We'll be back. Yes, we'll be back soon with another episode of Evolving ERP. But until then, thanks so much for tuning in. Go down there, like and subscribe. Are we tuning in? We're not tuning anything. No, we're clicking in. No one says that, though. Well, however you got here, please come back and see us again, because we'll be back for another episode of Evolving ERP. Have a good one.
Powered by Insight Jam.